I would like to call the July 21st Douglas Board of Selectmen's meeting to order. Can I please have roll call attendance?
Bonin present.
Cortez present.
Davis present. Hughes present.
Excellent. All right, so we have everybody here. Morse present. So I do not have any announcements as of yet this evening. The first agenda item was initially supposed to be joint school committee administration and food services director discussion, the food service program during COVID-19 and going forward, and any votes as deemed necessary under that discussion. The school committee, as well as the food services director and the school business manager, has opted not to join us this evening. So what I am going to do is I do have the new superintendent of schools, Mr. Vieira, who is able to give us at least a quick update on the COVID-19 situation and things that are going on there. I'm then going to hand the floor over, just so I can get into the record, as far as the investigation is going, the account from Jean Levitt, who is our finance director for Doug for the town, Patrice, and Mr. Cundiff. So, Paul, it's all you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Just to clarify, I know we talked earlier offline. The school committee and everyone will be available at a future meeting, and I know that was discussed. It was the timing and making sure we had all participants available for tonight. Scheduling was an issue, so we will be available at a future meeting, and I know we're working out a date for that. In terms of our COVID update, we have been working since I last came on, I believe it was 2 weeks ago, to put a plan in place to have kids come back to school. We did our task force meeting where I got some fantastic feedback. I think I said we had 15 staff members and 6 community members part of the task force. Last week, on Monday, I met with 128 teachers on Monday, and I think I met with over 85 community members to inform them of our plan to come back to school. Since then, I've taken all that feedback and incorporated it into our blueprint. Tomorrow, the task force meets again from 7 to 8:30, and we're really looking right now at 2 models to come back to school, 2 entry models to come back to school, and then we've really refined our 3 models of instruction, three models of instruction, one being in person, the second being hybrid, and the third being remote instruction. Our final, we have to submit to DESE by the 30th of July, our 3 proposals for instruction. We have a meeting with the commissioner tomorrow at 11:30 in the morning, and he will be issuing his final guidance to us the end of July, beginning of August. We need to submit to him our final plans for re-entry into school on August 10th. My goal or intent is to have a plan finalized by the end of July, beginning of August. I really need to wait until his guidance comes out, and then we can be able to share that with the community on a weekly basis with forums and different community events so people know what's going on. Had the opportunity today to meet with the Board of Health and get some input from them and share a little bit of our plan, and they're going to be on board. On Thursday, I think I'm meeting with police, fire, Mr. Furno, and some other representatives from the town to start looking at, if we go to some one-way hallways, making sure that our floor safety plan is up to code and that kids and everyone is safe in the building. We also need to look at traffic flow patterns depending on which of the 3 models we look at for reentry. So I'm hoping to lean on them for a little guidance and some suggestions based on the models. As is going on across the Commonwealth, the MTA has asked all local bargaining units to bargain any changing working conditions with administration. We have our first meeting with the Douglas Teachers Association on Thursday to look at the 3 models, and we have 2 additional meetings planned for August. On Friday night at 6:30 p.m., the commissioner sent out his guide on what to do if someone in school during the school year is either symptomatic or asymptomatic with the virus. He's done this a couple of times, sending out the advisory at 6:30 on a Friday night. I think it gives people the weekend to digest it instead of just emailing him directly on Friday and Saturday. So that guidance came out, and we've incorporated that into our plan. So a lot has happened since we last met. Again, taking all the input, and I hope to have something finalized to the community the first end of July, beginning of August. I know that people are anxious. I know that people want to know what the plan is. It would be premature right now with everything that's still changing for me to submit a plan. I do realize, and I'm well aware that other than going back to school fully the way it was prior to March 13th, whichever plan we come up with is going to have a slight bit of inconvenience to some people. I'm well aware of that, and we'll deal with those issues on a case-by-case basis as they come up. With that said, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions from the Board of Selectmen or anyone else in attendance.
It sounds like you got it pretty well covered, and we're still just waiting for some guidance. Is that the long and short of it?
That is taking a very complex process. It's summarizing in a sentence, but correct.
It's a skill that I have. I don't have any questions at this time.
I do not.
Dr. Tim Bonin, we haven't formally met, but thank you for being here.
How are you?
Selfishly, I'm very interested in the fall sports season. Any indication from MIAA as to what they're thinking?
Sure. So the MIAA sent out, I believe it was today, that if they were to start fall sports, the first day would be September 15th. Right now, they're leaning toward, they want to make sure kids get back into school and get back into school safely. But the only guidance we have received from them is that if fall sports are to start, the first day of practice would be September 15th. So we're already looking at a shortened and abbreviated season because, as you know, for football, they need to practice 2 weeks prior. They usually go back in mid-August. All the other fall sports go back, I believe it's that 3rd or 4th week in August. We now have that pushed out 3 to 4 weeks. I won't speculate as to what the MIA is going to do. I'll just leave it at right now they have the date to start as September 15th.
Very good. I heard that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, the guys that play football aren't going to miss those August double sessions.
Well, they might.
All right, that's, Hal, you got any questions? Hal's quiet. Mr. Hughes?
No. I have no questions.
Well, see, you got off easy today, Paul.
Thank you, sir.
All right. So with that, I'll move over to, I guess I will start with Patrice. How are you this evening, Patrice?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Doing well. If you could, Patrice, what I'd like to do is just get into the record kind of a more detailed timeline and series of events as it pertains to the investigation that we had opened up last week for the Town Food Services Program. So if you wouldn't mind just kind of throwing, well, or bringing in your accounts from the beginning and experiences all the way through up until we closed this out and moved into where we are today.
Sure. On 3/20, I had a meeting with Mr. Wojcik. He wanted me to kind of look into what we could do for some kind of a food plan, senior-related food program, and I did, and we met on that Monday, and I showed it to him and the rest of the EOC board, and we decided to make it a community-wide program, including children, because it didn't seem like there was enough children included in the school lunch program. So we did that. I partnered with Mr. Cundiff on the team that I was on, and we had a Zoom meeting on the 27th with Mr. Maines and Courtney, and we had another one on the 30th. Again with Mr. Maines and Courtney, and I'm not sure if there might have been a school committee person present for that one. We kind of didn't get anywhere. So on 4/6, I started a program for the seniors that didn't want to leave their homes, and for the residents over at Middlebrook who were going to be facing quarantine, so we wanted them to stay within their apartments. On the 16th, finally, after a lot of effort on the behalf of the Board of Selectmen and the town administrator, we were able to reach an agreement to do the community outreach food program from the high school with the high school staff, cafeteria staff, kitchen staff, and the food service manager. We had a tremendous lack of communication from the food services manager, Ms. Leon, and so on the 16th, she was dismissed from the community food outreach program, and it continued successfully until June 30th. We sent out our last bill until July 1st. Unfortunately, we're having a tremendous amount of difficulty trying to come up with some kind of a reconcilable invoice because the lack of communication about the inventory that I received. The inventory that I did receive didn't really seem complete. The inventory was from 3/25 until 4/30. Our program didn't start until the 16th. Bill and I have spent a tremendous amount of time, especially Bill, trying to do spreadsheets and make some kind of sense of it, when we still actually have no bill for June. So if Mr. Cundiff would like to speak on that, he knows a little bit more about how he set up the spreadsheet to make it easier for everybody to kind of understand where we came up with what we believe we used. If I could receive some of the inventory sheets that I know the cafeteria staff filled out weekly or did inventory during that time, some that I didn't receive that I am quite sure that Ms. Leon was probably the recipient of, that would make it a whole lot easier. I have been emailing her since April with no response. I email her inventory sheets, I've asked for inventory sheets, and I've had no response from her to date.
Yeah, Patrice, before I have Bill take over, do you have a ballpark? How many attempts there have been made on communication?
Oh, dozens. Yeah, I had every time anytime I removed anything or my staff removed anything from the school, I documented it, I emailed it over, no response. I've asked for her inventory and I've had no response. The last email that I sent was on 5/21. And I've had no response. If we could obtain those sheets, it would be a lot easier for us to be able to decipher some of this, you know, the tremendous amount of paperwork. You've seen the binders, it's just a tremendous amount of paperwork. And every time I ask just for a little bit of clarity, I haven't been able to get that information. The cafeteria ladies did a wonderful job, and I know that they kept very good track of what was used. And I didn't realize that they were sending over the inventory sheets exclusively to Lisa, and when I realized that, I asked them to include me in that, and they did. So I do have some of them. However, I don't have 2 weeks of April and I think 1 week in May. That could, you know, potentially clarify what we're looking for. Also, it's a great concern that the inventory that they did was on 3/25, and our program didn't start until the 16th. So it's very hard to kind of just decipher a $5,000 bill for 2 weeks of April.
Mr. Morris, is it possible for me to ask a question?
Sure.
I know that we're going to be launching an investigation into the records and the accounting, and I'll let someone else handle that. But in terms of not responding to emails, is it possible to have a record of the emails that you sent out that went unresponded to, so I can look into that, please?
You sure can.
Thank you. You have my email address, right, Patrice?
I do.
Thank you very much. I would appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Paul. All right.
So, the other problem that we have is that we seem to have a large inventory from the middle and the elementary schools. The high school I would never question because the high school was where the food was actually prepared. So if anything was taken out of the high school, I did encourage the ladies to use things that were going to expire before the school year started again, so we weren't wasting food. But there's a tremendous amount of inventory from the elementary and the middle schools, and other than the items that were removed by myself or my team, I don't have any other account of those. So I would assume that maybe some things were brought up to the high school before the 16th that I'm not aware of, or other things were removed that by somebody else that that I don't have the documentation for. Anything that was removed by my team was, or even by the cafeteria staff or Principal Romano, I have the inventory sheets for those. So it's very confusing that the inventory coming from the middle school and the elementary school is so tremendous without having any kind of supporting documentation.
Okay.
Patrice, were there phone calls made to the food service program director?
Yes, my phone calls were sent to voicemail. I think that we spoke only once on the phone. Everything else was done via email. If I called and left a voicemail, she would typically email me back. We had the food program before April 16th. It was the Monday before April 16th. I received a phone call from the fire chief on Sunday night stating that food program for Monday had been canceled due to rain. So I tried to call her to ask her, it's going to rain, so nobody can pick up food at the school. And she emailed me, so I ended up sending in a response that Mr. Wojcik.
Okay. And we can get those emails into the record as we need to, right? All right, so Bill, I believe Patrice had alluded to you, the spreadsheet master.
Kind of muted.
I think you're muted, Bill.
See in the far left there.
Yeah.
Did he bring that hard drive home?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, Bill.
Now we can.
Sorry about that. Yeah, so my role on this has been to support Patrice. Patrice has been the day-to-day person out in the field, and I've been kind of doing contracts and, metering the paperwork through, processing paperwork as we've gotten it. With regard to the invoicing from the school, I spoke with the town accountant early on and let her know that this was going to be treated just like any other vendor. We want to validate the unit pricing and the quantities, and we're going to go through and make sure it's what we use. And that's generally the approach we took, and that's generally the way Gene has trained us to take any invoice and treat them the same way. So I did that. In her office, she had her helper validate the unit prices for items based on the tech bid prices that the school solicits. When we got that back, she highlighted it. Yellow was good prices, red was prices that didn't match up with the prices that were provided in the bid. So we had a discrepancy there. Then when I reviewed it with Patrice, we found that there were quantity issues. We had issues with product that was being used. So we generated a list of questions for both invoices, the one from April 16th to April 30th, and the one from May 1st to May 21st. We still have not received an invoice for the June in use. So we sent those questions over to the school department, and we did not get a response until Mr. Vieira came online. And Mr. Vieira was kind enough to meet with his staff and ask them to respond, and that's when we got a response to it. Essentially what we got was an inventory of materials that went from March 25th to April 30th. Just to remind you, our program started on April 16th. So this is a number of weeks prior to us actually stepping foot in the cafeteria. We were actually out there only for a couple of weeks. And then the first invoice that we got was $5,400. So we went through, I went through the inventory, and we're viewing the inventory as backup material for the invoice and answers to our questions. Inventories for each school cafeteria was provided. So we had the elementary school, the middle school, and the primary, and the high school. So I tabulated all that data, compared it to the original invoice, and found that on a unit-by-unit basis, the quantities from the inventory varied from the first invoice. But interestingly, it was about $850 below the value of invoice number one for April 16th, April 30th, even though the time frame for the inventory was a larger period of time. So that just simply raised more questions for us. Are they counting inventory or billing us for inventory before we were there? They did have an active school program where they were feeding students for those weeks that the inventory occurred. So we're just concerned that, the program we were charged with is being billed for scope and items being what we used. So to Patrice's point, what would be tremendously helpful is the weekly usage slips that the ladies in the cafeteria took and provided to the food services director to basically justify the invoicing that we've received. And we just want to go through this methodically and have a logic behind it supporting what we're going to pay out of the program.
So
really the issues that we have are the date range, the unit pricing, and the quantities of materials. We haven't received an inventory for the May invoice, so I have nothing to compare it to. And obviously, we have not received anything from June.
So, Bill, do either you or Patrice know how the weekly inventory or the weekly usage slip was submitted? Was that handed like a piece of paper that was handed over to Lisa, or was that submitted electronically?
So I did receive an email through our finance director. Ms. Leon had actually sent her some things. I usually, from the ladies, they would just give me a little yellow piece of line paper and say, oh, we used, box of raisins, some French fries, or that type of things when they started providing me with the sheets. And I would put them into my inventory that I was keeping track of at the center with my staff. I assume that was how it was provided for Lisa, either by an email or by a scrap piece of paper, because I did have one that was emailed to me that was actually scanned, and it was exactly as the ladies have been giving it to me. It was just a little yellow piece of paper, and it had been scanned in. So I did receive one email that was scanned, and that, again, was not sent to me. That was sent to our finance director, and she forwarded it to myself and Mr. Condon.
Okay. So I think at some point, we're going to want to find out how do the cafeteria staff submit what's being used? Because I would assume this is a regular practice outside of this, or was it just during this?
I think, honestly, it was probably just during this, because they were in the kitchen for such a short amount of time, making like 320 or 330 meals. So it was just jotting it down and giving it to me to keep track. How they gave it to Lisa, like I said, I'm speculating. It could have been emailed, it could have been an inventory sheet, I don't know.
Okay. Well, I mean, I would think that you'd want to remit something like that daily in a kitchen or something, like however many, if you're preparing a food program, even if it's a regular food program, for inventory management purposes, like, well, I served hot dogs today. Okay, we served 280 hot dogs. They came out of inventory. Now I know what I'm going to need to order next week, next month, next year. So, but I can get into that later. You'd think it would be a daily practice. Is Jean on as well?
She was FinCom.
He is here.
Hi, Jean.
How are you?
I am well. So, Jean, if you could walk me through some of the correspondence that you may have gotten that Patrice and Bill haven't, I guess, or kind of your timeline or chain of events on it as the finance director for the town.
I haven't been involved with it as extensively as Bill and Patrice have. I've been mainly putting the requests in that they have asked me for. Like today, for instance, we met and Bill and Patrice said they were missing some information, so I sent Lisa an email requesting that. And in an effort to find some resolution to paying this bill so we can file a grant and pay the June 30 balances. Bill is correct. I have trained all my departments that we do not process invoices for goods and services we do not believe have been rendered. So I'm happy that they're going through the due diligence of this. But unfortunately, I haven't had a hands-on other than we did the initial audit, which we provided both Bill and Patrice. And again, I'm just trying to facilitate getting them the information that they're looking for so they feel comfortable in submitting what's going to be a check to the school lunch program. Because in essence, this is more of a complicated issue because the products came from the school lunch, which the students and the parents pay for. And then on the other side, the community development is from donations and, civil defense funds. So it's a very complicated thing where the town is actually paying itself and supporting its own program. But we still have to do our due diligence and we still have to make sure that we are only processing payments from the civil defense and the donation account for goods and services that we have been running.
So, Jean, I'm going to ask a very, very pointed question at you, knowing you as well as I have over the years that have gone through and knowing that every dollar has a story and that you do enjoy telling every dollar's story. Based off of the data that you currently have sitting in front of you between what the school's provided, Patrice has provided, and Bill has provided to you, would you feel comfortable remitting something into FEMA or to the CARES Act, asking for grant money or reimbursement from either the federal program or the grant selection, knowing the data that you have? Because I know that we're asked to say everything that we're submitting is true and accurate. Based off of what you have today, would you feel comfortable remitting that?
Well, I cannot because I do not have a signed voucher from Patrice or Kent, who are in charge of the civil defense. So until I have a signed voucher and it's gone through the warrant process, I cannot seek reimbursement for any other through FEMA or the CARES Act. So as far as I'm concerned, I will not file for FEMA until we come up with a resolution because my understanding is when you file FEMA, you're filing for a point of time. So I'm filing from June. I cannot go back into that point in time after I file. So I will not file because I don't have the information yet to process payment back to the school lunch program.
So, and I do have a follow-up. So, and having gone through the annual audits that we have, I guess the question is based off of our current level of documentation that we have based off of these programs, if we were to walk through an audit today, would you feel comfortable walking into one?
I always try to feel comfortable walking into an audit. I think what you have to understand is it hasn't been processed yet. You know, right now, just like with any other vendor, and this is what I explained to Bill and Patrice today, if I get a vendor, an invoice from WB Mason and they invoice me for 100 items, they have to confirm that they've been received and that we have possession of them. And then we pay the bill, we adjust the bill. This is no different. So we have not processed payment for reimbursement for the school lunch program. And I am not asking the Bill and Patrice process something that they are uncomfortable with. However, we have to seek information that gives them that comfort level so we can pay it, so we can process that bill. And that's what I feel my role is. I feel like I'm emailing Nancy Leon, asking for the information that Bill and Patrice need so that she and Bill feel comfortable processing reimbursement to the school lunch program for any materials, any food products that they have received and used for the community food outreach program that the community food outreach program didn't purchase directly themselves. I'm not in a position to say, I'm really in a position right now to gather information so someone can make an informed decision. That's where I feel like my role is right now.
Excellent. And to chastise Tim for saying stuff like found money.
Poor Tim. That was years ago.
I wish that camera were on me, I could shake my head disapprovingly.
But go, hold on,
yeah, hang on.
here it comes.
Hold on.
It's going to be a disapproving head shake.
There it is.
Slow zoom.
It's the best I can do. To the staff, I don't know how much communication in the past you've had with the food service department, but assuming there's been some through the years, has it really just become an issue with this program, or has this been a longstanding communication divide?
Is that correct to me?
We'll start with Eugene. I imagine you might be the best place to start.
I will tell you, I have never had an issue with the school department on any level. From my role, I receive original invoices, they're signed off, they've gone through the checks and balances. When I request information, I receive it. I've never had an issue with and I work extensively from the admin at the high school and the middle school regarding school lunch activity, student activity, and then school lunch program. I have not had a personal issue. With the business office, I've had a good working relationship.
Well, I don't think Bill or Patrice would have had cause or reason to interact with the food services director prior to this situation coming through.
That is correct. I didn't know who she was until our first meeting with the EOC where they were invited to come.
Mr. Chairman, through you, can I ask Gene a question, though?
Sure.
Gene, when we sign warrants coming from the school department that include food purchases, the only backup you're requesting at that time is the invoice from the vendor, correct?
Yes, it has to go through an approval process. So we see the original invoice, it's signed off from the school lunch director, and then goes through the business manager, the superintendent, and the school committee. So it goes through the same approval process that any town department has to follow. They have a few more signatures, but it still goes through the same process.
But you would not have had occasion to inquire into the asset value of the inventory.
That is correct.
Here.
That makes sense. So I know Attorney Bowen was thinking he might be able to hop on for like 15 minutes, but it doesn't look like he actually made it.
Well, I actually have more questions for Gene.
Please, ask all your way.
Do we have any department, Gene, that has an inventory stock that we manage?
I'm sorry?
Do we have any other department of town government that has a stock of inventory that we manage?
That could be viewed differently. I mean, I would assume the highway, the water sewer department, some libraries to some extent. We have inventory of paper products here, and not to the extent that the school luncheon is run. I mean, that's a more extensive.
Wouldn't the fire services and ambulance have an inventory that we'd manage?
So we do. So I just want to get into that for a second.
I would say, I feel like I'm being put on the spot here, and I don't really feel comfortable, but I think every department has some level of inventory, but it's not to the extent that the school lunch program has, I guess, in the products that they store.
So I'll go through a couple examples that I'm aware of. The ambulance service has a formulary of pharmaceutical products that is carried on the ambulance. They also have stuff, for lack of a better word.
Consumables.
Hoses, needles, IV bags. They're not pharmaceuticals, they're not drugs, but they're all the things you need. They're consumables. And with respect to pharmaceuticals, because some of them are on the controlled substances list, we have what's called a NARC box and a book. And that book is updated every single day at the change of shift. And both the officer who is leaving the shift and the officer who is coming on shift sign that book. And then there's a reconciliation with the EMS director, Lieutenant Worcester, who is going to review that because he is going to form his order to replace those items that are missing on a regular basis. But there's an inventory system in place. Whether it's on a computer or if it's in a general ledger, there's a record of what has come in and what has gone out. If we don't maintain that list, we lose our ticket. You can't run an ALS ambulance service and push fentanyl to patients that are experiencing extreme pain and then not be able to account for what happens to that narcotic. At the library director has an inventory, obviously, of books. He has an order record, a receiving record. He knows not only what he has in his collection, but where it is. So if it's signed out to a patron, now that's on a computer. His inventory is managed through a computer system that tracks where his products are. And then when he does a disposal, he does disposals fairly frequently, he accounts for the fact that he's removing products from his collection. The point is, it's one thing to process invoices and make sure there's backup. It's another thing entirely to have an asset management program for inventory, which at some level of frequency must be maintained for accuracy. You cannot use what I ordered last month or what I ordered this month last year as your guide to what you should order this time around, because who knows what you've done. If you didn't consume at the same pace as you did in the past, now you've over-ordered. If it was super popular, then you've under-ordered. I don't think we have any system, this is what I was trying to get at with, I wasn't trying to put Gene on the spot. I don't think we have any system in town that I'm aware of where there's paper, handwritten transactions being tracked by someone to justify the outlay of expenditures. Even in the police department, one of our busiest departments, when we buy gasoline for cruisers, the officer, we have an account at Beck's, there's a receipt generated, and correct me if I'm wrong, Gene, but both pieces are submitted to the finance office before the bill is paid. An invoice from Beck's, and then all of the slips that are collected by the officers day by day as they fuel their cruisers, correct?
That is correct.
So we have a double system of checks and balances as to the vendor says we owe, and then we check with our receipts to make sure we actually owe that before we pay it. It would, and this is when we talk about internal control, this is the concern, is that there's over $137,000 worth of supplies a year that come through the school lunch program. And if you don't know what you have, and it doesn't justify your order history, we can just keep ordering food and keep spending money. But it's a darn shame because it's a revolving fund, and that balance can be carried forward. if I'm not mistaken, Gene, the balance is carried forward every year? If there's a positive balance?
The school lunch is a revolving fund, that's correct.
So that's, I just wanted to make sure we put a fine point on this, that it's one thing to say, does List A, generated by the schools, match List B, generated by town staff? That is a valid conversation. There's also a conversation about how does the school even arrive at List A? What is the underlying system that informs what you're asking to be paid? I just want to make sure that point got on the record tonight. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Matt.
So my understanding with this investigation is really looking at two things. One, to make certain that we're being billed what we consumed, but secondarily, the food service program, is an area that seems like it needs to be tightened up considerably, and before we move too far forward into 2020 school year in the fall here, we are correcting some things. Is that the goal of this investigation?
I think it's the beginning parts, it's the start of it. And, a few years ago, this board got together and worked our rear ends off to get an override passed, which was almost like making history in Douglas. And when we had done that, we made a commitment to the taxpayer and to the community that we were going to be as cautious and as fiscally conservative as we possibly could be to really care and nurture that additional revenue that was brought in via the override. And part of us doing that and being as fiscally responsible as we are is to go through and make sure we've done it with highway, we've done it with the police department, we've done it with fire, all the other departments of, it's okay for us to be spending money, but we have to make sure that we're not wasting anything. And if there's any kind of fat that can be trimmed, or if there's things that we can be doing more efficiently, then that's exactly what we're going to be doing. To Mr. Vieira's credit, he was kind of a breath of fresh air as a new superintendent when he came in, because he's extremely receptive to saying, there are things that maybe we're doing wrong, and we're happy to open up and do it in a better way or a different way. And he's very receptive and committed to being a solid, reliable partner to the town and to the community that he's trying to educate the students of. Unfortunately, this ball was already in motion before Paul had actually showed up to be able to really start getting through to things. But ultimately, yes, it's starting with the food program because it was just glaringly obvious that something was just not right here. And the lack of communication and not getting straight answers when we were asking very pointed questions and for very specific information. There just seemed to be a lot of shuffling paper and sending us whatever they felt like sending us in hopes that if we ignore it long enough, it'll go away, which we're not going away. Which brings me to the follow-up point on this, is that I did have the opportunity to speak with counsel. He has been in contact on a few occasions with the council that's representing the district, and he has asked that we afford to him the opportunity to work with the opposing counsel on getting pointed subpoenas put together, understanding how and what we could do regarding getting an audit put together for their inventory management system, the revolving fund around food, specifically the food services program. So I believe that he's asked that we give him a little bit of latitude to be able to work with the opposing counsel in order to discover who a viable third-party auditing firm would be, and also look at some of the pointed things that we want them looking at as they go through it.
Mr. Morris, is it possible to make a comment?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, first and foremost, I just want to say a couple of things. In terms of the food service program, and I can't speak to the depth of the audit, but every year the Department of Education comes in and audits the food service program. I can't speak to the depth of the audit, but I do know that we have successfully passed those audits from year to year. Secondly, Mr. Cundiff and Ms. Rousseau mentioned that you are still waiting for bills from the school from May and June. I thought in my email that I sent out to everyone, I believe it was on July 13th, that the directive was to make sure that you had received all the inventory and all the bills for, in the invoices for the entire food service program. I think I stated in the email, and I used it as an example, at this point, you're the customer, we're the vendor, and Gene is right, it's been drilled into me 100 times, you don't pay for anything until you have proof of receipt. So if you haven't received the bill for May and June, can you send that to me in writing? And the final thing, and I mentioned this both to Kevin and to Matt, the school is 100% behind an independent third-party audit. And I want to go on record stating that today. We are 100% behind a third party coming in and auditing the books. And then we can go on record of if we've done something wrong, it needs to go on record. If we could do something better, we can address it. But also, if we are doing things right, it should be commended for them. And if we're doing things above board in an exemplary manner, we should be commended for them. And if we are a model that some districts can indeed take from and learn from, that also needs to go on the record, and we should be commended for that as well. So I'm hoping that this full audit from a third party, which again, as I said, we are in full support of, and we'll work collaboratively with everyone to iron out, we'll bring everything to light in a full transparent process. So I just want to make sure that everyone in the Board of Selectmen to the community knows that we are in support of that.
Thank you, Paul, I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
And that's all I got for now.
All right. With that being said, what I will be doing is weekly looking for updates from town council to see where we at with the independent auditing firm. I'm sure at some point we are going to, probably at the tail end of or getting towards past when we get an audit completed, the results of an audit, we will be moving into an executive session where we would have direct questions that would be pointed towards the school business manager and the food services director as well. So those will be coming up on future agendas.
How long is this audit going to take, and how expensive is it?
I mean, in all honesty, Rich is going to start working with the council from the district, I would say as soon as tomorrow, if we can get him to, and they can coordinate schedules. So, I mean, understanding a cost on said audit, we really won't know until we establish a firm. And then the nature and depth of the audit, to which Paul has graciously said he's willing to open up to a full, forensic audit on everything that's going on to see what are we doing right, what are we doing wrong, how can we do better.
And where's that money coming from?
Well, I believe we would end up having to probably cover some of the costs of said audit.
Jean's still there? Maybe she hasn't thought.
Jean?
Still here. I think the amount of the audit appropriation is going to have to increase because I believe it was the Board of Selectmen that ordered the audit, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
So it would be under our town audit account that we will have to increase that request for the budget for FY21.
Okay. So, and in order to do that, we'd first need to get a auditing firm and then discover how many hours would be behind it before we could ballpark that. Would that be a fair assessment, Jean?
Well, I think you have to put a scope of work together, and I think you have to ask for an auditing firm that does this particular type of audit, and Paul may have more experience than I do with that. I don't know who you...
Well, in my conversation with Attorney Bowen, I believe he has used who's the firm that does our annual audit?
Melanson?
Yes, I believe he has used them on forensic auditing before.
They have done forensic audits. I always think of that as following the money, like NCIS. So, when I look at audits like that, I'm always looking at it from a strictly monetary, financial. I understand inventory is money too, but I always think of it differently. But we can definitely reach out to Melanson and see if there's something they can add to the scope of work. It would still need an increase in the appropriation though.
Okay.
Mr. Morris, I agree with what Gene said. Obviously, we need a company that can follow the trail of the money. but we also need an agency that understands how schools work and how schools function, and someone who has that lens to be able to look at the process. You know, understanding food service, understanding procurement, understanding technology, understanding contracts. It is a unique niche, and we need to make sure that whoever we hire understands that niche as well.
Understood. So I mean, I think that's the biggest reason why, when I was talking with Attorney Bowen this afternoon, where we felt that it would probably be a good idea for at least him and your council to kind of get a general consensus of, you know, what type of auditing firm, what level of audit they're looking at, and then it's up to, you know, Rich to bring back to us some ideas and what we may come up with enhanced scope or what we're looking to really dig into.
Correct.
Just, I guess, half a question and half a...
Before you go look for an auditor, though, I think they need to know what they're looking at, what you expect to get out of the audit. And I agree with the superintendent. It's, you know, it's not every auditor has the same level of expertise as this they have or need.
Understood.
I guess half a question and half an observation. We have, or we're going to charge our town council with more or less at least laying the outlines of this audit and laying down the groundwork from this board's point of view, from our point of view. And he's going to interface with the school district's attorney. I know it's popular and maybe past history to treat the school district as a separate entity, but we essentially have the town paying two attorneys to negotiate here. I think it's something that should remain on all of our minds, particularly in light of the comment you made that I agree with 100%. When we got the override, you know, we have a responsibility to spend that money wisely. And I think that goes for any town money, for $1 of tax dollars. But I think that we need to keep that in mind. We're essentially funding both sides of this, if there are sides.
Well, along those same lines, is the school's attorney the one on retainer, or is this a newly hired attorney to walk you guys through this process?
Hey, this is a newly hired attorney. The attorney we have on retainer is one that deals with labor laws and with contract laws. And this attorney specializes more in this field. Our attorney that we've used over the past half dozen years really works specifically with, like as I said, negotiated contracts, unemployment, disability, and that field of law. And this attorney is a little bit more well-versed in the municipal side and this aspect of the law. So it's a separate attorney.
Could I just follow up with that? And maybe it's a naive question, but I truly believe that we're all on the same team. Could I just ask, why do you need an attorney?
Excuse me?
Why would you have to retain an attorney for this internal investigation?
So that's a great question. I wanted to make, and I've had this conversation with both Mr. Woods and Mr. Wojcik. I wanted to make sure that what was going on and that the rights and that the rights of the school were being protected. I am new to this. This is, you know, a full forensic audit and what was going on is something that I haven't done, and I wanted to make sure that what we were doing and the approach that we took was both legal and right and just. So I reached out to council to make sure that we had someone who could help guide us through the process. This is completely uncharted waters for us. I mean, for instance, you know, I did a lot of research myself on the Civil Defense Act of 1950, and you know, I will give kudos to you guys. Unfortunately, you had to reach out and find it, but there are very few people across the United States who had to enact that Civil Defense Act of 1950, and I needed some information on it, and I needed counsel to be able to do that digging and find out a little bit more about it, and I just don't have the level of expertise to do that. And like I said, at the end of the day, I want to make sure we have answers. I want to make sure that we do this in a transparent manner. I want to make sure that what we're doing is right, and we had to unfortunately go up and hire another attorney to be able to make sure that everything was above board. I rambled for a little bit there, Mr. Bowen, I apologize. But does that make sense?
No, it does, and I can understand the approach. I can. It's a number of things going on, certainly in your life, getting acclimated to Douglas, and yeah, in some ways, I just think the entire thing's unfortunate, but we'll let the process play out.
You know, one thing, every year we go to a conference, and one of the sessions of the conference is 4 or 5 things from the Superintendent Association attorney, who talks about cases that are going on in districts. And things like this happen all the time in districts, these unique situations that are difficult to navigate. And at the end, his advice to everyone is, please make sure when you have these situations that aren't clear and aren't black and white, you reach out to council to make sure that the rights of the district are being protected. And that's what we did. But I understand your question.
Anybody else have any questions or commentary on moving forward?
I would just say that I know we've charged Attorney Bone, and certainly he's capable, he's the man, to more or less begin this, but I don't think that this is a matter, there are matters that the board kind of assigns to the attorney and then kind of walks away, and I would just say that this is a different type of matter than that.
Yes.
Something I think we, the board needs to keep our hand in.
Absolutely. Well, and the intent would be to get Rich to guide us through the framework.
Correct.
And then once he's got the framework, then we can start adding substance or removing substance based off of what's pertinent or relevant to the situation. So ultimately, at the end of the day, we're certainly not handing this entire thing over to Rich. We're leaning pretty heavy on him to at least help us establish a proper framework to get the results that we're looking for.
As we should. Thank you.
Yep.
Final question from me. Choosing an auditor ultimately is our decision?
So yes, ultimately, it would come back to us. Rich will come back with some recommendations, I'm sure. But at the end of the day, it's our choice. It's our investigation. We're the ones running it.
Okay.
All right. Mr. Hughes, you have anything? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Gene.
You know, I always look at the goal in the audit, and I do it with both of the town audit. It's an opportunity to learn and, what we're doing right and the superintendent, and also learn where we need to improve. So, to me, that's what an audit is supposed to do. And I always look forward to that, when the auditors come here and I say, what can we do to improve our processes? And like I mentioned, I have not had any problems with the school department implementing any new procedures going forward from my perspective in previous audits, from the superintendent, the business manager down. So I thank them for being open to the same type of willingness to be able to look at this in a positive way and to say what we're doing right, but also improve on, where we need to improve, as we should with any audit. And that's the goal of them.
Thank you, Gene. Mr. Hughes, you have anything?
No, I'm all set.
How about you, Mr. Davis?
Similarly, all set. A good presentation. I think we have the issues identified and look forward to seeing what the auditor will come up with.
Excellent. Patrice, you all set?
I am.
Mr. Cundiff?
Okay.
All right. He just signaled.
We got the hand signal. You're muted, Bill.
Touchdown. It's good. Paul, you good?
I'm very good. Thank you for having me, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak.
Oh, my pleasure. Okay. Well, then we will move on to what is labeled as item number 3, which is actually
item
number 2. Suzanne?
I'm glad you put that on the record.
Just saying.
Yeah.
Approve minutes and possible votes.
I wasn't here, so.
I will abstain as well. I was not feeling well at that hour.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes for the July 14th, 2020 Board of Selectmen's meeting.
Second.
Excellent. Motion has been made and seconded. Can I have a roll call vote, please?
Bonin abstain.
Cortez abstain.
Davis, aye.
Hughes abstain.
Morris, aye. There's only two of us doing it.
Yeah. We can still, if I'm correct, can we reconsider the motion?
I did watch the meeting. I'll take my vote aye.
All right.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Simple Matthews, come on.
It's turning into a game of not it.
It was, yeah, exactly.
I'm almost ready to open an
Yeah, you're
investigation on us that we can't even approve minutes. All right. So, item number 3, which is labeled as number 4, the administrator's report.
God help us. Mr. Chairman, today we were forwarded a copy of the Beacon, which is the newsletter of the Massachusetts Municipal Association, which for the most part relate information of which most of us are already aware. However, interesting tidbits regarding the state budget and the revenue forecast for the Commonwealth. I don't want to read verbatim, but I'll paraphrase from the document. The delay is expected, and this is for revenue estimations. The delay is expected to continue into the fall. The revenue forecast used to build the governor's fiscal 2021 recommendation back in January hasn't been updated, and they won't have the numbers they need to close out fiscal 20 until September. So, at a hearing of the Commonwealth Resilience and Recovery Special Committee last month, Mark Cusack, who is the House Chair of the Revenue Committee, said the early estimate of a $2 billion shortfall for fiscal '21 could now be as high as $8 billion. And the state's rainy day fund is $3.5 billion, which kind of explains why they were in a rush to get a debt facility lined up and to issue debt and to drag their feet on coming clean with what they think their revenue estimate is, especially since the economy is still struggling. We still have lots of new claims for unemployment. All of this goes back to the point of being very careful with the budget going forward. That's that update. Number 2 on my list, Mr. Chairman, is that this afternoon, the Massachusetts Strategic Health Group, of which Douglas is one of 3 members, voted to offer an invitation to the town of Westford to join our group. What that would mean is that our current 1,500 covered beneficiaries would be increased by 1,100.
All right.
So that's close to about a 45% increase in our book of business. And the effect on retirees is similar. Westford would add 478 retirees. We have about 920 to 940 now in the system. In the world of insurance, bigger groups are better because you can better estimate the risk profile that you have, because your population, as it gets larger, begins to mirror the entire population very closely. And so the underwriter's job gets a little bit easier. They're not trying to work their way around a lot of uncertainty. They're pretty clearly predictable steps. For the town of Westford, what this means, if we give them a rate pass on their actives and we let them score all their savings on the retirees, because our plan is so much better and so much less expensive, the town of Westford will save about $1.2 million this year. And versus their renewal estimate, and then versus their expenditure from last year, they stand to save about $450,000. So it's very important for them. It should be a good offer. I would expect them to join us. What that means is we'll have the odd circumstance of having a 4-member board, which, you know, possibility of deadlock, but it's highly unlikely. Just everybody has to remember, it doesn't matter how big the group is. If you join as a group, you get 1 vote. So there's no dilution occurring here, it's just a new set of covered lives coming in. This was a carefully considered decision. The underwriters at Gallagher reviewed the Blue Cross Blue Shield's renewal estimate for Westford, as well as did their own numbers based on their insight into claims, because Westford is a represented client. So we really think we're being very conservative here. The presence of this group is actually going to be of great benefit to us. It's going to overall lower our exposure to medical risk. So, as a group. With that said, I'll give you an update next time we meet. The actual impact of having the group grow is the risk impact, and then there's just the way we buy reinsurance will change the larger we get as a group. So as you get bigger and bigger, you can increase your attachment point and pay less and less premium, thinking you probably withhold some of your own equity to cover the risk of extreme loss on your own with your own money. That way keep the actual year-to-year increases in cost down. So it's, so far, so good. It's working out exactly the way we hoped it would. I don't want to steal Hal's thunder. There's been or Bob Manerick's, but there's been a tremendous amount of activity around economic development. And during this time of pandemic, so it's very encouraging to see interest in Douglas under current circumstances. I just want everybody in town to recognize that the town owns a lot of land. The Board of Selectmen isn't authorized to sell very much of it by town meeting. Right now at the grammar school and the properties on Webster Street are the properties that you have the ability to sell without any further action from town meeting. Everything else that a party might be interested in buying, the committee that has jurisdiction over the land, first of all, has to dispose of it. If it's not this board, then they need to transfer the control of that property over to the Board of Selectmen. And then the Selectmen would make a finding that it's not useful for municipal purposes and refer it to town meeting for authorization to sell. This sends our suitors into a bit of a quandary, because that means there may be at least 2, as many 3 approvals before land can be released. So we're doing the best we can to work with those entities that want to locate in town on property that may currently be owned by the town. One of those entities is associated with a very large project that the EDC's been working on for a long time, and there are many moving parts. So what town meeting voters will see is proposed zoning change. They will probably see a request from this board to dispose of certain property. There's some landlocked property that it's almost smack dab in the middle of the project footprint that the town has owned for many years. It has no frontage on any street, so it doesn't have a lot of value. It was from what I can tell, it was a tax taking from a very long time ago. And, or somebody who died intestate and then there was no taxes paid and whatever. But long story short, at the end of the day, the time frame of the project is driven by the investor. And the town, the best we can do, needs to try to, if they want the project, try to accommodate that with the process that we have. So the warrant can still be reopened and some of those items can be put on, and that might be the request. Just everybody has to recognize that we're trying to lay the framework around a project that could potentially very nearly double the industrial commercial tax base of the town, which would alleviate at least 1 year's effect of the compounding 2.5 that we do every year just to keep the revenue going. I say it all the time, I don't think it hurts to repeat it. The tax base, as it grows, is the denominator and the fraction that creates the tax rate. The bigger that base is, the more dollars you've spread the tax burden over across the top of it. The tax rate would come down. Your individual household may or may not feel the impact of that, but what it has a tendency to do is typically a 2.5% increase in the base and a 2.5% increase in the levy would offset, and the typical household would see a zero.
Right.
That's kind of what we're trying to do here, and to fill the pipeline with a couple of projects that would get you to momentum, so not just 1 year, but over the course of 4 or 5 years. To that end, there's been a lot of confusion on Davis Street about which cannabis is which. Because we have the existing HCA with Z&T for a retail establishment at the location that's been discussed at great length here. Then we had another request for an HCA from an entity that wanted to buy a building that's more or less across the street for multiple establishments, right? They wanted, as far as I recall, they wanted a grow, a processing, and retail. This board has declined to negotiate that HCA with that potential business because the business's reputation isn't satisfactory to the board. In other words, other HCAs have been taken in other towns and nothing has come of them. In all of this confusion, we had an attorney who probably may not appreciate my comment, but probably needs to sharpen the pencil when it comes to communication skills, because she kept asking, without identifying who her client was or where her location was, for an HCA. And for all intents and purposes, we were interpreting that as the other group. Having their attorney ask us, even as they were asking us as the principals of the business. It's not the case. That attorney represents a completely distinct investor who only wants a grow HCA on a piece of property we've been trying to get the cannabis grow people to pay attention to for the better part of a year. So there is a developer who has been in front of you. If you recall, he had a greenhouse concept, relatively small, right? And he was looking for parcels where he could put 2 or 3 of these things. And he was headed out to, you may recall, a cannabis conference in Las Vegas, where he was going to pitch this real estate concept. He's going to be the landlord and developer, and they're going to lease from him and grow under an acceptable size canopy. That was Rob Wolf. As far as I know, he is the principal of the development company, represented by this attorney who finally had the common sense to tell us what property she was talking about. My recommendation to the board is that at your next meeting, you entertain the possibility of that HCA so that that discussion can have some resolution, positive or negative. But it would be a taxable property on Davis Street with the added benefit that it's cannabis, so it has more than one revenue stream. So that is good news for the town, and that's where we stand with all of that work. We're preparing finally the bid packages for the Webster Street property. It's taken a while to get the last piece done, which is the appraisal. Spoke to the appraiser today about finalizing that within the next week or so. I took a party out there just this week to do an on-foot tour of it and a couple other properties in town. So we're doing everything we can to market it. I would say we would have at least 2, but probably as many as 4 suitors that already know they want to bid or they want to consider bidding before we even advertise. So it's developing rather nicely.
Nice.
So that's what I have for you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thanks, Matt. Which will bring us to item number 4, labeled as 5. Open session for topics not reasonably anticipated 48 hours in advance of the meeting. I can't think of anything I really want to dig too deeply into. You got something, Tim?
Well, I'm sitting here, I didn't anticipate bringing this up, at least 48 hours before, but DCR, it's been pretty quiet this summer.
Very.
They're at, what, 20% in the parking lot, is that right?
I think they're only open in the paved parking lot.
Yeah.
And from what, is the police chief still on? I see him.
Yes.
Hey, Chief.
I am here, can you hear me?
I
Yes.
can. You have any updates on it?
I believe they're at like 20%, and they're only using the paved parts of parking lots in the park. This past weekend, I know they closed rather early. They were at capacity, but we haven't had any major issues or concerns.
Excellent.
So, and
It was busy last weekend, but quiet, fairly quiet.
my understanding is the state increased the out-of-state fee,
I believe so.
and I just wonder, how does that factor into our formulary with the state?
Ah.
I don't think they ever increased. I think it's still, we get $1 a car or something like that.
Yeah, that hasn't changed, but
That, it was supposed to go up at one point from what Ryan was trying to negotiate, but I don't know where we ever ended up with that.
I think we had discussed in the past that if it did go up, that we would be looking for an adjustment,
Yeah.
correct? Right.
You know,
So-
there's an opportunity to
Right.
make a case for that as the law's written and as our understanding, as documented by our DCR communications. There's some money there to,
Now that we finally figured out how to get it.
yeah. The guy who controlled it now is now running the whole DCR, so. Actually, Chief, since you're still there, Mr. Chairman, if I go back to my report for a second, I guess I wasn't quite done.
Sure.
Because Vice Chairman Cortez had asked us to look into the position being taken by Maya with respect to qualified immunity.
Yes.
And this issue of the beacon today, the MMA is urging the legislature to have more conversations about QI. I'll stop there, I got another point to make, but Chief, what's going on with the Chiefs Association or other police groups? What are you hearing?
I think you're muted, Chief.
So,
Okay.
Mass Chiefs, you got me?
Yep, got you now.
Yeah, Mass Chiefs had a press conference today. They're working with the legislators and their lobbyists on the qualified immunity, and they're working with the governor. You know, it's certainly something that we don't want to see touched. It's just going to open up municipalities and individual officers to frivolous lawsuits.
Absolutely.
You know, there are legal scholars out there who can talk about qualified immunity all day. It's a very difficult doctrine to understand, but if the most important part is what people should know is if an officer does something that is egregious, they're not going to be covered by qualified immunity anyway. So, you know, it's something the Chiefs Association is taking seriously. I know SPAM is taking it seriously, and you know, we're working with the governor's office and hoping that he would veto anything that would affect the qualified immunity, because it's just going to lead to, you know, more lawsuits for minor things for us individually and municipalities.
So before the Vice Chairman,
Expounds.
yeah, I'll tell you that I was surprised to learn that the way this language is written, it applies to all municipal officials.
Yes.
And that's a very poor decision by the legislator, or at least the senators. I thought that that would be a good idea. We already have a hard time getting people involved in municipal government, you know, as a way to serve the public. It has always been understood that any public official with decision-making authority could be sued personally if their actions were, so the Latin phrase is ultra vires, if they were acting outside of the scope of their duties. But the way the Senate language is in this bill, it reads, I'm paraphrasing because I'm not going to be able to quote it, I didn't print it out. But basically, anytime there's any interference with what somebody considers to be their constitutional right, the person making that decision or taking that action would be open to suit without any qualified immunity. That's very troublesome, because think of all the things we do, whether it's the building official or the health agent or anybody. What choices could we possibly make? So we swear an oath to the town to uphold the bylaws of the town and the laws of the state and the Constitution of the United States. But if we assume that the bylaws that are passed and approved by the Attorney General of the state are legal, and that the orders that we're following and the rules that we're enforcing were legal, therefore, we're covered, we're protected so long as we follow those legal prescriptions. But if somebody interprets it, well, that's my property right to build a skyscraper on a 10,000-foot lot, and you can't tell me no, and I'm going to do it anyway, and plus I'll sue you if you try to stop me. That's a real big mess, and I don't think anybody really wants that. So now I'll stop, Mr. Vice Chairman.
Somebody's probably going to have to pull the plug on me, because this is something that's intersecting my life in a number of ways. The Senate had a bill, they titled it euphemistically the Police Reform Bill, and the qualified immunity language in that bill, as the town administrator said, would hit all town employees and remove qualified immunity, or QI, from all town employees. And I think it would be a bigger disaster, I think, than any of us realize. All of our decisions, us on the board, because we're special town employees, would be subject to unfiltered litigation. In other words, if somebody we denied something to, or our decision affected him, if they can find any way to link that to a protected right, they can go right into court. QI acts as kind of like a check valve or a filter, whichever you like, and it takes cases out that, as long as we in good faith, I don't want to say that, it takes most of the cases out that we would consider frivolous. And now that at least is on the chopping block, and it would be gone. So as the town administrator said, that covers every board that meets in this building or meets anywhere. It covers every employee of the town. One of the things to think in the back of your head is teachers. We have, every municipality has a lot of teachers. We have ours. And think of the actions they take, and think of the liability that could generate. The Senate bill had very wide-ranging QI language. The House bill, which was released yesterday, and then I understand tuned up today, was somewhat more limited, but not where I'd like to see it. And keep in mind, from any point of view of a municipality or the state, lawsuits have costs in a number of ways. Lawsuits end in a number of ways. They end in a judgment if the case goes to trial and a judge or a jury awards someone money. They end in settlement, which is probably the most populous way or the most likely way. Or they end in summary judgment, which you file at the beginning, and qualified immunity is a part of that. If we don't, as a municipality, have qualified immunity, it encourages more of those cases to go farther down the pipeline. We, as the town, lose in two ways. We are forced, or not forced, we're stronger incentivized to settle, and we pay attorneys by the hour as everybody else does. So our legal costs for a truly frivolous suit, one of which is in the front of my mind, but I'll refrain from mentioning, might be only a few $1,000s if we employ qualified immunity and we're able to escape that. If we don't have it, our legal costs alone could double, triple, even go farther down that road defending a frivolous suit. So while the bill is at least aimed at police reform, euphemistically, it has far-ranging things beyond the police. Our police department is accredited. Our police department is great. I think we all know that. And I'm not worried at all about liability with the Douglas Police Department, but I am worried about the legislators removing a mechanism that allows us to control our legal costs. And I will also end up giving Senator Fatman a well-deserved kudo. In the Senate bill, when things were going very, very quickly, he was the one that stood up and he exercised some parliamentary procedure and was able to table the bill and at least slow down what would have been, I believe, a rash set of decisions. So out of all the senators, Oz was the one who stood up. I think he should get credit to that. That wasn't too bad, was it?
No.
Okay.
And the only thing I would add to that is for those members of senior leadership, town managers, town administrators, police chiefs, fire chiefs even, anybody else, building commissioners, if people can start to reach us, then we have to carry insurance on our assets to protect ourselves from those same frivolous lawsuits. And it is not cheap. So the pressure that already exists, because it's a seller's market, for people to fill these positions would only go up, because you'd be very unwise to take a town administrator position in a town where there are troubles and think that you would escape
Right.
without having insurance to protect you, that those places are going to be paying $250,000 to get somebody to take the job. It's kind of not terribly unlike what has happened in the medical profession with the kinds of malpractice activity that occurred. I don't hear so much about it now as I did maybe in the 90s, but where an OBGYN would look at 40, 50% of all their revenues just going to the insurance to cover their practice. That puts tremendous pressure on the economy, and it really, it makes the whole thing a squeaky, a Jenga tower, because
It does.
less qualified people will want the jobs, less qualified people make more mistakes, the mistakes generate more lawsuits, yada, 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 go on and on. So now I'm done. My report.
All right.
And we thought we had it hard getting people to run for office.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. It thins the
right.
talent, it thins the talent pool without a doubt, because if you have to worry about that, then why would you volunteer your time to the town?
See you, boys.
Okay, well, that brings us to item number 5, labeled number 6, adjournment.
I would so move.
I'll second.
Motion has been made and seconded. Can I have a roll call vote, please?
Bone and I.
Cortez, aye.
Davis, aye.
Davis, aye.
Morris, aye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.